Hey guys, so I know I haven't uploaded very often. I said back, I think while I was pregnant or shortly after having my baby, that I was going to upload more. That didn't happen. So basically, what happened was I had my kid, and now I don't have time for anything besides him and school. If you don't have kids, they have a lot of doctor's appointments. There's a lot you have to do to make sure your kid stays healthy, and you also have to do a lot of playtime to make sure they're getting the interaction they need and make sure they're getting all the exercise they need. And babies eat a lot, which I already knew, but I don't think some people realized. Um, but I am currently off of school. We're on our winter break. So I'm going to try to pre record some videos, hopefully. But one thing I kind of want to do is I want to do a couple things with this channel. Like, I want to keep doing my, like, deep dives into mythology, though that's not really what they are. The, like, little short videos, short-ish videos of where I talk about Greek mythology or whatever other mythology you guys want me to talk about. So if there is a mythology you want me to talk about, please let me know. But today I want to do one of the other videos I had in mind, which is a bit of a more personal video. So now that I've gotten some of the updates for the channel out of the way, consider this my warning. If any of you know me in real life, you know that I don't often shy away from personal details. I'm very, very open about my experiences and pretty much everything that happens to me. So if you don't, I'm going to be talking about giving birth, which this isn't meant to scare people. I want to preface it with that. But I am going to have some details, and this is my personal story. Not every birth is like this. Most people I know's births weren't like this. I have my own health issues that made it more complicated than other people I know's births, and it kind of made me feel crummy comparing myself to them. So if you're ever in a similar circumstance of the circumstances I was, which I'm going to be explaining, hopefully this can give you some sort of understanding. And if you know me in real life and ever hear me say I am never birthing another child again, but I want more kids, this is why. I love my baby, but this sucked. So with the if you don't want graphic details of labor and birthing, disclaimer out of my way, I'm gonna start talking about the process. So it started a couple days earlier, actually, and for about 2 months, month and a half, something like that, I'd been getting really intense back pain, and I just assumed I was having Braxton Hicks contractions, which, if you do not know, are essentially fake contractions. And it's just your body's way of getting ready for actual contractions. It's basically an exercise for your uterus. And it's very uncomfortable and it sucks. But I had been experiencing those since my second trimester. So I was kind of used to them at this point. I'm like, well, they're kind of bad. But, I'm just going to go lay down on a heating pad for a little while. And this was also, as it is right now, because I'm recording this in December of 2020 in the US, during COVID. And so on, I want to say April, I want to say either 14th or 15th, I went to my normal OBGYN appointment, and they were just making sure everything was okay. And I told them about the really bad back pain, and they go, all right, well, we'll run some tests to make sure there isn't any, I think they said Pitocin in my system. And the reason I say that is because Pitocin is, also, I'm sorry for any weird noises. This is a side note. I'm sorry for weird noises. My dog is in the room like always, and my baby monitor is also going. So you might be hearing both of those. My dog currently has a bone and is probably going to try to climb under my desk. But anyway, the reason I say I think they were checking for Pitocin is because Pitocin is one of the hormones your body releases to progress labor. So they did a blood test to check for hormones, and they did the normal routine stuff, which included checking my blood pressure. So unfortunately, my blood pressure was really, really high. I think like it was over 140 over something. It was very high. And they're like, hey, this is really alarming, but maybe you're just stressed because of the back pain you've been having. So come in tomorrow, we're going to do, I think it was 30 minutes to an hour long blood pressure monitor, where I basically just sat in a recliner with the blood pressure cuff on, drank some water, and played on my phone while my husband waited in the car because I was worried about the back pain kicking in and not being able to drive. So I go in the next day for that, and I didn't talk to my doctor at all that day. And then they're like, all right, you're going to have to come talk to your doctor tomorrow. So this is what time you need to be here. And I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. It's going to be tomorrow morning before my husband's up, so I'll drive it myself. I generally don't get back pain in the morning. So I'm like, all right, that's fine. Can I get a note for my husband because he's late for work? And then I went home. I go back the next day, and she tells me that my blood pressure is ridiculously high, and that if she could legally induce me then, she would, but she couldn't. So I had to get induced the next morning when I was officially 37 weeks through my pregnancy. Which, it's better than being told you're getting induced or sent in for an emergency C-section that day, but I wasn't ready at all because, again, I was only 37 weeks in. I expected to have at least 2 more weeks to get ready. But I was like, all right, you know what, whatever. And then they go, also, all that back pain you've been having is likely your body already going into labor. And you've just been slowly going into labor and then coming out of it. And I'm like, oh, well, great. So they give me the piece of paper, tells me which entrance to go into at the hospital I was supposed to go to, and gave me the whole spiel of what I was going to be doing. And they told me, all right, you're going in at 8 a.m. And I'm like, I will try to go in at 8 a.m. And because we had to go first thing in the morning, I had to fight my husband to get him awake, woke him up to coffee. I had to get my dog to my parents' house, and then we could go to the hospital, which is about 15 minutes from my house, but a solid 30 minutes from my parents' house. So we tried to leave as early as we could, but we got there closer to 8:30 or 9. Bless you, Loopy. She's got the sniffles. But we got there closer to 8:30 or 9 in the morning. And the day I found out I was going to be induced, I spent the entire day texting people, letting them know, and emailing all my teachers to let them know, hey, I'm going to not be available for a few days. I'm getting induced. And for the most part, my teachers were like, all right, good luck, hon. Just email us if you need any extensions, or have your husband email us off your account. And I'm like, all right, cool. This is great. So I did bring my homework with me for my recovery period, assuming I would have energy to do it, which I did. I did have some energy to get some done. But I got induced at 8 in the morning, or 9 in the morning, and I had an 18-hour labor. So from what I have been told by the women who have children in my life, bless you. Oh my goodness. She is so sneezy today. I am so sorry. I don't have editing process or capabilities. But I have been told by the women in my life that being induced is more painful than going into labor naturally. I have no idea, because this is my first and only child giving birth to, and I plan to keep it that way. So I have no idea if this is true, but it kind of makes sense because you're forcing your body to do something that it isn't doing on its own. Which is confusing in my case because my body was already trying to do this on its own and it just happened to not want to do it that day, I guess. But so I go in, I get checked in, they start inducing me around 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. It sucked being awake that early. I was just really tired. So I know there's a couple different ways for them to induce somebody. And what they did with me is it was a 3-step process and it sucked. So for the first step they did is they took a dissolvable pill. It's very tiny. And they basically shoved it up to my cervix. And that was painful because they couldn't reach my cervix. So when they had to check my dilation, which is how large the cervix is, they had to bring in a nurse who had longer and slenderer fingers than my actual nurse. But I was just like, you know what? Anything to make this less painful. And honestly, that first stage, besides them trying to check my cervix, it wasn't too bad. I was still functional. It was like a backache. They gave me some Tylenol for it. That's about it. I was still able to get up and walk around. I could still go to the bathroom. I could still do things on my own. I got some homework done. I got some reading done. I played on my phone a lot. And then I don't know how long it was. I don't know how long each step was. But I know that the next step was they started a line of Pitocin to progress my labor. And this is when it started to hurt, but it hurt enough where I was like, oh, I actually need something that's stronger than Tylenol for this, but like not at the point of don't let me walk anymore hurt. So I was just like, hey, can I get something for the pain? This is starting to hurt really bad or pretty bad. And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll give you Dilaudid. And if you've never been on Dilaudid before, oh, it's a doozy. I managed to take a nap and I was really, really out of it. I remember at one point, so my nurse, she came in, she goes, hey, we want you to progress your labor as much naturally as possible. So we want you to get up and start walking around and your husband's going to help you because you're on Dilaudid. And we don't want you to walk around on your own. And they're like, but we still need to monitor your contractions. So they gave me this fancy schmancy Bluetooth contraction monitor. Anybody who knows Bluetooth technologies knows that this doesn't sound like a great idea. I was like, oh, sure, whatever. Worst case scenario, they have to put me back into the bed. So I remember walking around my room and there was a playground out on the roof below us. And I was like, I want to go play. And my husband's like, no, you're not going to the playground. For starters, you're hooked up to so much crap. And second off, we're in the middle of a pandemic. You're staying in bed. Or you're staying in this room. So then I was like, hey, I gotta go to the bathroom. So he took me to the bathroom. And walking to the bathroom, just going that short-ish distance, disconnected the Bluetooth monitor. So they ended up, after I got out, they ended up sending me back to bed. And after that, they could not get the monitor to pick up my contractions. We knew I was having them. I could feel them. They could feel them. But the monitor would not pick them up. And all of the contraction pain, none of it was like stomach pain, no cramping. It was all in my back. And it just felt like someone like hitting you in the spine repeatedly. And it sucked. And I'm using examples that people who have never had a kid can kind of understand. But it was awful. And then At one point, it was close to the end of the Pitocin. They call in the doctor. My contractions are getting pretty bad. They're kicking up more. But I felt well rested. I had taken a nice, like, 2 hour nap. It was great. Or at least it felt like a 2 hour nap. I have no idea for how long it was. And I, like, had my little peanut ball, which, if you don't know, it's a yoga ball, but shaped like a peanut. And you put it between your legs. And you just, like, use it to move your legs around to help speed up the process. But I was like, this is great. I have my peanut ball. I get to lay in bed. I have Jello. I had Jello for lunch and dinner. This is great. And the doctor comes in because they still can't get my contractions. The monitor still will not pick them up. And at this point, it's probably around midnight, I want to say, because based on the timeline of things. And the doctor comes in. She's like, hey, we need to put an internal monitor in, so let me just do that real quick. So while she's putting it in, she's also checking my dilation. And she's like, hey, you're like 8 or 9 centimeters dilated. I'm just going to break your water. I was like, okay. And she's like, this is going to get really intense really fast. I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm ready for this to be done. I want to go home. I want to take a shower. Like, earlier in the day, I had asked them if I could take a bath, and they're like, no. I'm like, but I really want to take a bath, guys. I feel gross. I've had so many hands in me. I know it's graphic, but, like, that's how I felt. So I tell them, that's fine. Let's just get this over with. I'm done. And they're like, are you trying to go drug-free? And I'm like, I'm going to go as long as I can without an epidural. And this is mostly because I'm scared of needles. It's not a phobia anymore. It's just a discomfort with them. And I was also just nervous in general because, I'm about to push out a child. But I had already had so many issues with the IV because they tried putting it into my forearm and couldn't get a vein. So they tried putting it in right about here-ish, somewhere around here, and they blew the vein. And they ended up putting it in the middle of my hand. So I tell them it's okay, go for it. And they're like, all right, let us know when you want an epidural. And she breaks my water. And before she did that, they lined the entire bed with potty pads, like the puppy ones you use when you're house training a dog. Yeah, they they laid out a bunch of them for me so I wouldn't make a mess all over their room, because it is literally a bag full of water. So that's why it's called I'm going to break your water, because it's a bag of water. So I felt the water. I didn't look. I didn't care. This lady was checking my cervix and trying to insert stuff into me. I didn't care to look. I was so tired and exhausted and over it at this point that I was like, whatever, let's just get this done. And at this point, because I know for a fact it was past midnight, that means it was officially the 18th of April. And I was in immediately. I was like, oh, this sucks. I was like, oh, this is awful. And the nurse goes, all right, just bring us if you need an epidural. And she leaves the room. And then 2 minutes later, I'm yelling for my husband, Noah, get the nurse. And he's like, you have a call button. I'm like, get the nurse. I couldn't do anything. It just felt like, and see, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm getting back pain and it sucks. But I was in so much pain. So he gets the nurse, she comes back, she's like, all right, these are what your contractions are at, this is what your blood pressure's at, this is da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and they're checking everything, and they're like, I have the epidural team coming up, or the people doing your epidural coming up, and when they got there, I'm like, oh, thank God. I am so tired of this pain. I want it to be done. I will shove a needle in my back, and they're like, well, it's not really a needle. I'm like, I thought it was a needle. What do you mean it's not a needle? And she goes, well, it's basically just a catheter, and we put it into your spine, your spinal cord, and that administers the drug straightly to your spinal cord, which is why you go completely numb from the waist, from like a certain spot down. And in my case, it was like under the bust line and down. I couldn't feel. With an exception that I'm about to get into. So they do the epidural. They had to try to figure out my contraction rhythm so that I wasn't having a contraction in the middle of them trying to do it. And they were quick. They were so fast, thank God. Because like right after she like taped everything, I started having another contraction. And they have me lay down before it kicks in. They gave me my little epidural button, which I did end up tapping out. And again, I'll explain that in a second. But they basically give a self-administer, and it does have a cap limit, so like you can't overdose on it or anything. But it's basically just so you can choose how much gets administered, so you stop when you're not in pain, instead of it continuously being pushed into your system. Which again, for me was really, really nice. Because I was in a lot of pain. And I still have back pain, and I can't tell you if it's from this, but it feels a little coincidental. If it's not from having the bait, like pushing him out, it is from carrying him. So my doctor has me lay back down. She checks my cervix. She's like, hey, it's go time. And I'm like, yeah, I can tell based on what my body was doing. And she's just like, all right, so I can feel when your contractions are. I will tell you when to push. I'm like, all right, cool. So instead of putting me, so usually they'll put you in stirrups. I could not get to the bottom of the bed very comfortably. So they did have stirrups up. So if I like stretched my legs out, I could put my legs in them. But they basically just like, they had a nurse on my right and my husband on my left, and they had them each take a leg and just pull it to my chest every time I had to push. So and this is where I get into the issues I had with the epidural. It worked wonderfully besides this. So if you know me in real life, you know I have hip issues. I have no idea what it was. I should probably talk to my doctor about it because I've had these issues most of my life, as far back as I can remember. But my hips pop in and out of the joint. And again, I have no idea why it does this. It usually doesn't cause pain, but sometimes it does. Like something gets pinched on the way in or pulled on the way out. That isn't just the bone. So while I'm in labor, my husband and this nurse are holding my knees to my chest, and every contraction and every push, like the contraction would start and my hips would be fine. And then I'd start pushing and I'd feel them pop out. But because they're out for such a long time through the push, they would hurt intensely. And because I'm having a contraction, it was trying to also squeeze them back in. So this continued through the entire 3 hours I was trying to push this kid out. So that was I didn't feel anything besides my hips. That's it. So at one point, I'd been pushing for about an hour and a half, and they go, he's stuck. I'm like, what do you mean he's stuck? He got stuck on my pelvic bone between my hips. And I guess my hips were just too narrow for his, and my OB had told me ahead of time that he had a pretty big head. And she told me there was a high chance he would get stuck. I didn't believe her. I knew that she wasn't lying to me, but for some reason my brain's like, it's not going to be that bad. No, he was stuck for an hour and a half, if not longer. So what is my, whatever. But so at one point I was just in so much pain. And again, the pain is solely from my hips. it just felt like somebody was ripping. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like if someone tries to force you to split your legs, like forces you down into a split. You guys have probably never experienced that, actually. Or if you've had a dislocated leg, you know what I'm talking about. The splitting feeling. Or if you've had someone try to force your legs apart, like my husband does it when he's trying to tickle me, because I will shove my knees into his stomach. Like if someone is forcing your legs apart when all they want to do is stay closed, it feels like that. And that is the best way I can describe it. And it literally just felt like my legs were gonna get ripped off. And again, nobody I know who I've talked to about these things has told me they had the same experience when having their child. Nobody I know has been like, oh yeah, I felt like my legs were being ripped off too. So that's just like one weird, and I wanted to point out that nobody else I've talked to has said that, because again, this is just my story. It seems fairly unlikely it's going to happen, that your legs feeling like they're ripping off is going to happen to you, especially if you get an epidural. So my dog is doing all kinds of weird things in the background. But so I get so exhausted and I'm in so much pain from my hips, and I just go, I don't care what you have to do, cut this kid out of me. And I just fell apart. I had a mental breakdown. I like full mess. So the doctor basically explains to me, we can't, your bones are in the way. And I don't care, cut my bones. I don't care, I can't do it. And I just felt so hopeless in that moment that I couldn't do anything. Which, I have depression. I know what being hopeless is. I've never been that hopeless. At least not in a really long time. So feeling that just ate at me. But eventually my doctors get me back into it. And my husband gets me back into it. I start pushing again, and eventually, thank God, at 3:15 in the morning, my kid's like, all right, I'm here, and just dives out. And thankfully he had no complications besides his head was elongated. If you ever look at there's certain websites that are alien conspiracy theory websites mostly, or talking about ancient Egyptians. Sometimes you'll see them there. I think the History Channel's website probably has a picture of it. But it looked like one of those cone head alien things. It looked like one of those skulls. So to just kind of protect it and keep it warm, we did have to put a hat on it at all times so that nobody would accidentally bump it on anything. So we knew the hat was there and it was brightly colored so we would see it. But yeah, that was the birth, and I'm going to talk kind of briefly about postpartum. Not going into too much detail on this because this is something that does happen quite often with other people. I just think I had a really severe reaction. So my baby didn't wake up for the first 24 hours. He was alive. He was breathing, but he would not wake up. And he didn't eat anything. He would not open his mouth for 24 hours. All he did was sleep, poop, and pee for 24 hours straight. So we ended up having to go on to no Latch Protocol, which basically meant we had to force him to suck on our pinky while injecting basically a syringe with a straw at the end of formula or breast milk, whichever we were using, into his mouth. And partially because of my shitty genetics and partially because my kid wouldn't latch, I was unable to produce enough naturally. And eventually we just switched from supplemental formula feeding to full formula feeding, which is what we do now because I just don't produce, dude. Sometimes that just happens and it sucks, but at least my kid is fed and at least he's healthy. But we had to, make sure his blood sugar stayed up. We had to feed him every 3 hours and monitor how much he was eating and monitor how much, how fast, and monitor how much he went to the bathroom, which sucked. But so the day, I want to say the day after the no latch protocol was put in, like once we got him on the syringe feeding and everything pretty reliably, he was still sleeping a lot, but he was awake a little bit more, which again, that's normal. Labor is exhausting for all parties. I'm pretty sure the doctor went home and passed out afterwards. But so they come in, they're doing the checks to discharge us, and they come in and my kid is, so before they come in, my kid just started letting out this painful scream. I felt in my soul that he was in pain, and I cannot explain to you why, but it just sounded like something was hurting, and it was probably just his head, because again, his head was deformed from the being stuck for so long. So I'm pretty sure it was just his head hurting. But I also have issues with large crowds. They give me anxiety attacks. And so my kid lets out this pain scream. So I call for a nurse. I'm like, hey, my baby's screaming bloody murder. Can somebody come look at him? And they're like, yeah, we'll send someone in. So the pediatrician comes in, not for that, but for the discharge. And my baby's fine now. He's mad because he's naked. He didn't like to be naked. But the doctor's checking him out, making sure everything is doing what it's supposed to, making sure he's healthy, and he was in perfect condition. And I end up having a panic attack because there's 6 people in my room, and my husband's gone, so I have to do all the talking, and I'm shaking because I'm just overwhelmed. I'm having anxiety. And then the nurse comes in and starts belittling me for, she comes in, she wasn't my normal nurse, she was just one of the other nurses, and I'm trying to explain to her what I heard, and she's just like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Babies make new noises. So my normal nurse comes in and goes, hey, what's going on? And before I get a chance to speak, the other nurse just goes, oh, well, she heard a new noise and got scared. No. It sounded like he was in pain. So I was genuinely worried that he was in pain, because there were probably a couple of reasons he was in pain, let's be honest. Either his head deformation or he was circumcised, so that could be it. It was just really rude of her. And then I was also having a panic attack, and she decided to take my blood pressure. And of course, because I'm in the middle of a panic attack, it is sky high. And my nurse goes, hey, I'm going to let you calm down for a minute. I can see you're kind of stressed. I'll come back in a little bit. Try to calm down. And I take a very long time to come down from anxiety attacks and panic attacks. It can take an hour for me to calm down. And this nurse comes back 10 minutes later, and she's like, I'm still shaking. I'm still kind of hyperventilating. I'm still showing all the signs of still starting to come out of it. And she decides to take my blood pressure again. So I continued to be admitted. And I ended up getting put on I can't remember what it's called now. I ended up getting put on a IV with magnesium in it. There we go. And I thought the magnesium was for my blood pressure, and she's like, no, it's actually for swelling so that your brain doesn't swell and then you have a hemorrhage in your brain. And I'm like, oh, I thought this was going to help with the blood pressure. And she's like, no, but we're putting you on blood pressure medication. I'm like, okay. So they put the IV in, they do all that, and they start the drip, and it literally just felt like my veins all the way up my arm. It literally felt like it set fire in my arm. But they had to get me through that course of it. They couldn't lower it or anything because doctor's orders, and I had severely high blood pressure. So they ended up taking me onto a lower drip for, I think, a longer period of time. Like, they lowered the level, set it for longer, and I think they moved the IV, but I can't remember. Because it was right here, right in the vein, right between the two tendons, and it just felt like fire. But they had to take urine samples every time I went to the bathroom. They had to take blood samples every 4 hours. So I looked like I had been shooting myself up with drugs by the time I left the hospital because of how often I was getting blood drawn for about 2 days and for how many different needles got put in me over the course of 2 days. But they ended up, like, they were very nice about it. They always felt bad when they had to come wake me up. And I was also on, I think every 4 hours they would come and check my blood pressure. It sucked. I hated it. I felt useless. The magnesium made me so tired that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even take care of my kid. All I could do was like lay in bed. And I felt so useless. And I hated every minute of it. And I felt so bad for my husband because he had to take care of our newborn baby on his own while also trying to like get him to latch to me because we were still trying at that point. And it just wasn't working, and he was getting frustrated. And then if the baby started crying while he was outside, like, hun, the baby's crying, I can't do anything, help, I'm attached to a bunch of wires. Or I'd just call a nurse in, and they were all very, very lovely. And but eventually my blood pressure lowered enough that they were able to send me home. I had to take blood pressure medications they wanted me on them for 2 weeks. I had to stop a little bit short because my blood pressure dipped pretty low. I ended up being at 101 over something. And they were like, yeah, stop taking them. And we're going to have you in tomorrow to check your blood, like, don't take them tomorrow morning, and you're going to come in and we're going to check your blood pressure. And when I went in the next day, it was like 112 over something. But like, again, it's going to be kind of, what I'm about to say is going to be a little bit graphic. What is very normal to happen is when you push out a child, you tear. Usually, from what I've been told by other people who have birthed children, you tear down towards your bum. And it goes on a scale from nothing to a 4th degree tear, which is just you become one big hole, essentially. All the way from vagina to anus is torn open. I had 2 2nd degree tears, one going up and one going down. So I had to use water when I went to the bathroom because otherwise the salt would burn, obviously. And that was kind of my biggest worry, was like scarring and pain from that. And honestly, apparently the scars aren't that noticeable, if at all. There is pain, obviously, but I had like pretty bad tearing. And it's only like very, very rarely that anything hurts anymore besides like general pain. I'm back at my pre-pregnancy weight, and I'm actually going to be trying to lose some of it because I was overweight and still am. But like, other than that, we had some health scares. If you guys want to hear about the health scares that happened after getting out of the hospital and stuff, let me know in the comments and I can talk about those. But I will save those for a separate video because this video is already 40 minutes long and I did not mean for it to be this long. But like I said in the beginning, this is just my story. This is not how everybody's experience will go. I don't want this to scare anybody. I want to put this out here because, one, it just kind of makes me feel better talking about it with somebody who, well, not with somebody, but like I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to my computer. I'm looking at myself in the screen, but I know this is going to reach people who might need to see this. Maybe you had a similar experience but don't know anybody who has. I want the people out there who might feel like nobody understands their experience to be able to see this. Or I want people to be like, who wants to learn what the ranges are to see this, because yeah, I planned on birthing 2 kids and I'm not doing that anymore. That's not my plan. We already planned to adopt kids. I now plan to adopt earlier than I thought. But thank you guys so much for sitting through this surprisingly, shouldn't be surprised, but surprisingly long video. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear other stories or more stories from my life. I have plenty from when I was a child. Let me know if you want to hear more stories relating to my kid. Obviously, he will not be on camera. He is not going to be in videos, and I will not be using his name. Obviously, like, those are for privacy reasons. I want my kid to not be on the internet as much as possible. We hardly post pictures of him on our personal accounts. But let me know if you guys have any ideas for any future videos, any mythology videos, if you guys want to see like a day in my life, which would be very difficult to film, but I am willing to try. Also, I'm doing a little bit of an experiment. I am going to be starting up an OnlyFans and a Patreon to see which one does better, because I have this theory that Patreon does better if you already have an audience. And they're not going to be videos like this. My face isn't really going to be in them. I'm going to be doing crochet videos, so they're going to be voiceover and me talking to the camera, or not to the camera, but over top the video I'm doing. And it's just going to be some simple tutorials for crocheting. So if you either like to watch people crochet, or you want to learn to crochet, or you just like to hear people talk, please join me over on OnlyFans or Patreon, whichever. It is your choice. I am not going to be making them very expensive. I'm just starting them to kind of make a little bit of money for recording equipment if this is truly something I want to continue doing, and if this is something you guys enjoy, me making my videos. But I also want to go into dog training while I am working on becoming a psychologist. However, dog training is apparently almost $4,000, which granted is a tenth of my yearly tuition for college, but what am I to do? I don't have $4,000 laying around. So join me over there and let me know what you guys want to see in the future. I will see you guys next time. Bye!